I'm thrilled to have you on the show. I've been a long admirer of your work, and you have a new book that I want to talk to you about. It's called Hauntings, A Book of Ghosts and Where to Find Them. I was fascinated by this book. Firstly, it's brilliantly written, but it's also not just about the ghost stories. It's also about history as well and how the two intertwine. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, obviously, we're living through very interesting times these last few years, and I always have to try and give myself something else to think about as well as everything else that's going on. And my first passion, I suppose, my first love has always been history and archaeology, and I wanted to come at history and archaeology from a slightly different direction. And so there had always been a recurring experience that I'd had filming on location, from sober academics through to members of the public, people with all sorts of specialties, would be on a battlefield or would be in a ruined abbey or would be in a castle. And more times than I could count, people would say in a break in filming, don't tell anyone, but a few years ago, the strangest thing happened to me, and then would unfold what was effectively a ghost story. And so I had sort of built up a bit of a compendium of those experiences. And more than anything else, I just became determined to consider what it is in human nature that means that we've shared these kinds of stories and experiences with one another for thousands of years.
Well, I want to read a quotation from the book itself. You say, "Scratch the surface of our publicly stated beliefs, and we may find ourselves privately admitting to times in our own lives when logic and reason said one thing, while our gut said another." It does seem to me that even if you are a complete atheist and you have no belief whatsoever in the supernatural, there are moments in life where we experience what we might call the numinous, something that connects us to something outside of ourselves. This is a universal experience, isn't it?
I think it is. I think, especially in the largely secular West, once you don't have, once people aren't so comfortable and confident talking about maybe the transcendent or the numinous or whatever, you find yourself distanced from suitable and helpful vocabulary in order to articulate certain kinds of experiences. But I think there's no denying that most people, even people who would be avowed atheists, people who would say they don't have any belief in anything beyond the here and now, and you're born, you die, most people have experiences, have a sense in a place every now and again of something that's inexplicable. Perhaps makes them feel insignificant in the scheme of things, and they perhaps, get a sense of something strange. Even Archie Roy, who had the chair of astronomy at Glasgow University, he also had a chair of parapsychology at Glasgow University. And even although he was a scientist of such renown that he was part of plotting the orbits for the Apollo landings on the moon, he also made room for the scientific study of poltergeists and all of the rest of it. And he basically said, I have throughout my life been aware of a sense of something strange. And I think perhaps that is quite a useful summary of what a lot of people feel.
And to what extent are you, you as a historian, are you connected to the past? Are you drawn to the past? And in what sense does the past inform who we are today, in your view?
I think I find the past very helpful. I've always found it to be a reservoir or an encyclopedia of ways in which people in the past have confronted the eternal verities and challenges and whatever. And I think it's sometimes and always instructive, actually, to look at the way and consider the ways in which they faced their challenges, because those can be helpful, for us as we face our own challenges. But I feel that it's so much a profound part of the human experience to be aware of the past. To be aware of our own ancestors, to be aware of family members that were here for part of our lives but are no longer with us, and people continue to feel connections to those people in various ways that are hard to articulate. And it comes down to us as ghost stories, but I genuinely feel there's much more going on there.
Yes.
That science and in any other way we ought to open ourselves up to contemplating.
The way your book is structured is each chapter you outline the historical background of a particular location across the British Isles, and then you mention some of these ghost stories that have been told over the years and how they relate to the history, but you don't really make a judgment about whether you believe that they're authentic or not.
Well, no, I've always felt in many areas that a kind of agnosticism or a kind of open-mindedness is just the best way to approach a lot of topics. They're not all strictly ghost stories in the conventional sense. There's a story in there that's on the Isle of Skye, and it's about, from the 1930s onwards, for decades, more people than you could possibly count reported an encounter with a little black car. And the experience was always the same. A small black car would be seen to be approaching along a single-track road, often at speed. People would pull in, ready to let this thing come past, and it would just disappear. It would disappear into dead ground. It would never come. And tourists told it, the locals told it. They all had these. Children would look out for the wee black car every time they were out, and sometimes they would see it, sometimes they wouldn't. In the 1960s, there was a tragedy on the approach to the ferry back to the mainland. A little black car fell off of the ferry into the water, and two women and a child drowned. One man escaped, but it was a little black car, and most of the sightings of the little black car had been on the road approaching where the ferry left for the mainland. After that tragedy in the 1960s, the little black car was never seen again. That phenomenon stopped, although it had been well spoken about for decades. And it stopped, and you think, what is that? That's not a ghost story.
No.
That seems to be some kind of collective shared premonition. That once the event that had been the premonition, or a version of it, actually unfolded in real time in the real world, it was gone.
Absolutely fascinating.
And how do you make sense of that? Because not all of these people were lying, even if you assume that some of them were.
Yes.
A lot of these people were having an encounter that they couldn't explain any other way.
But that's interesting, isn't it? We assume that people are making it up. There's a story here about Sandwood Bay where you talk about someone who saw a mermaid. Now, I don't think that person is lying. I mean, Walter de la Mare, the poet, claimed he'd encountered a mermaid. I think there are certain types of people that have a visionary quality about them, creative people. And I think from their perspective, they do see these things.
There's no doubt in my mind that the majority of the people that recounted things to me, they're not lying. I mean, some people are. Some people want the attention, and they'll make a story up just for fun or just to get attention. But the majority of these people, especially the matter-of-fact way in which they recount the story, people are experiencing phenomena. Yes. I absolutely believe they're having an authentic experience, and it's not enough just to dismiss it all as ghost stories.
And just finally, Neil, one of the most interesting aspects of your book is the way in which you invoke the memory of your father, your late father. And you say that actually his passing and your reflections on that affected you as you were writing the book and actually changed your perspective of the world as you were writing.
Yeah, very much. I mean, my dad died a couple of years, nearly 3 years ago now, and I've begun, for example, it's not an unusual experience, but now when I look in the mirror or if or I catch my reflection, in a way in which I never used to, I see my dad. I see my dad's face, so that I can see him haunting my physiognomy, so to speak. And I've dreamt about my dad, and I had time that I spent with my dad towards the end of his life when he was dying in the last few weeks of his life. Where we shared experiences and we said things to one another that we had never come anywhere close to saying, prior to his last few days, and it just fundamentally, I was going to write the book anyway, but that happened before I had actually put pen to paper, so to speak, and he undoubtedly haunts the book in the same way that he haunts me.
Well, it's a very powerful book. It's called Hauntings, A Book of Ghosts and Where to Find Them. Neil Oliver, thank you so much.